Have you ever wondered what the air smells like just before a man-made storm of death? It's the scent of damp earth, nervous sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. It is the odor of power about to be demonstrated, not with laws, but with blood. Welcome to Rome, where spectacle was the ultimate law. The Forum Boreum reeked of its trade, the pungent miasma of damp stone, cattle dung, and sacrificial incense clinging to the humid air. Beneath a slate-gray Roman sky, in the year 264 BC, a space was cleared. Here, amidst the clamor of the market, 3 pairs of men, their bodies honed into weapons, stepped into a makeshift circle of packed earth. They were not soldiers defending the Republic. They were slaves, their lives forfeit, their purpose singular. They were there to fight to the death, not for glory, not for freedom, but to honor a ghost. Decimus Junius Brutus Scaeva had just laid his father to rest, and this brutal ballet was his final offering. The Roman historian Livy would later mark this somber event as the first recorded gladiatorial combat in Rome. But this was no public festival, not yet. It was a private, sacred duty, a munus. A munus was a debt owed to the spirits of the dead, a belief that blood spilled upon the earth could appease and nourish them in the afterlife. The sharp clang of bronze on bronze, the grunts of exertion, the final, shuddering sigh of a life extinguished, these were not sounds of entertainment. They were whispers to the underworld, a solemn offering of vitality to the departed. Each drop of blood was a prayer. This grim ritual, however, was not a Roman invention. It was an imported tradition, a shadow cast from the south. In the sun-scorched lands of Campania, cities like Capua had long practiced such rites. The Samnites, Rome's once fierce adversaries, staged warrior duels during funeral feasts, transforming a human sacrifice into a contest of martial skill. The focus slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifted. Over generations, the act of ritual killing morphed into ritual combat. The death itself, while still the inevitable conclusion, became secondary to the struggle that preceded it. The courage, the skill, the defiance in the face of oblivion, this became the heart of the spectacle. As the Christian writer Tertullian would later scathingly observe, it was the spilling of blood for the sake and satisfaction of the dead, a grim transaction that was becoming dangerously entertaining to the living. By the late 3rd century BC, a profound transformation was underway. The echoes of funeral dirges were being replaced by the roar of a crowd hungry for more. These duels, once tethered to the solemnity of tombs and private grief, began to break free, migrating from somber family ceremonies into the vibrant, chaotic heart of Rome's public festivals, the ludi. These games, sanctioned and funded by the Senate, were no longer a private family's duty but a matter of state. Initially, the ludi were deeply religious, held to honor gods like Jupiter Optimus Maximus, especially in times of crisis, plague, famine, or the threat of invasion. The Senate, ever fearful of divine wrath and desperate for divine favor, would vote to pour public funds into these spectacles. The inclusion of gladiatorial combat in the ludi was a stroke of political genius. It transformed a private, morbid ritual into a public display of Roman power and piety. The state now sponsored the spilling of blood, framing it not as a somber necessity for the dead, but as a thrilling gift to the living and the gods. This shift was subtle, a gradual poisoning of the well. What started in a muddy forum now required grander stages. Temporary wooden arenas began to rise from the ground, their construction a spectacle in itself. The rhythmic pounding of hammers, the shouts of foremen, the smell of fresh-cut timber promising future bloodshed. By the end of the Republic, these ephemeral structures gave way to monumental amphitheaters of stone, symbols of permanence and power. The state had absorbed the munus. It codified the violence, scheduled it on the public calendar, and funded it from the treasury. What began as a son's duty to his father had become a politician's tool to curry favor with the masses. With each drop of blood that stained the sand, the Republic was writing a new kind of law, one not etched on bronze tablets, but carved into the very stone of its arenas. The colossal iron gate groaned open, its protest echoing across the sudden, breathless silence of the amphitheater. From the cavernous dark of the tunnel, a man emerged, blinking against the blinding assault of the afternoon sun. He was alone. Across the vast expanse of sun-bleached sand, a second gate rattled upwards. A lion, its ribs a sharp relief against matted, dusty fur, stalked into the light. It had been starved for days, its hunger a weapon honed by its keepers. This was no duel of equals. This was not a contest of skill. It was an execution, meticulously staged for the ravenous thrill of thousands. This was damnatio ad bestias, damnation to the beasts. By the 1st century CE, the Roman arena had evolved into a gruesome theater where humanity was pitted against the raw, untamable fury of the wild. These spectacles blurred the line between punishment and entertainment. The condemned, a motley assembly of criminals, prisoners of war, and rebellious slaves, were the unwilling actors in this failed drama. They were cast into the arena against lions from Africa, bears from Caledonia, and leopards from the east. The animals, deliberately maddened by hunger and confinement, ensured a swift, brutal, and utterly predictable conclusion. The practice had roots in the dying days of the Republic. Ambitious generals like Pompey the Great understood the intoxicating power of such spectacles. For his triumphs, he orchestrated elaborate hunts, or venations, where vast numbers of exotic animals were slaughtered. But he also staged scenes where condemned men were thrown to them, offering the crowd a potent cocktail of imperial might and visceral horror. Not all who faced the beasts were helpless. Some were trained fighters, the bestiarii, who either by force or for pay learned to battle wild animals with spears, nets, and daggers. Mosaics and stone reliefs across the empire capture these desperate moments with chilling detail. A man bracing with a spear as a lioness lunges, a nimble netcaster dancing away from the raking claws of a panther. These were not fantasies. In the damp soil of Roman Britain, archaeologists unearthed the silent testament to these horrors. The pelvis of a man, likely a gladiator, scarred with deep puncture wounds. The marks were a perfect match for the jaw of a large feline. He had died in the claws and teeth of a lion, thousands of miles from the Colosseum, his final moments a forgotten provincial show. The empire's thirst for this ritual was insatiable. The philosopher Seneca the Younger, writing in the 1st century CE, recorded the ultimate acts of defiance. He told of prisoners who, facing the prospect of being torn apart for a crowd's amusement, would choose their own end. One choked himself to death with a lavatory sponge. Others found any means necessary to die in the shadows, rather than in the sunlit arena. Their suicides were a final, silent rebellion, a reclamation of dignity in a world designed to strip them of it. What unfolded on the sand was not merely violence, it was calculated, psychological degradation. The hunger of the beasts was a tool. The animals were not just starved to ensure they would kill, but to make the kill more savage, more spectacular. Every roar that echoed in the arena was not just a sound of nature, but a carefully orchestrated note in a symphony of terror, composed and conducted by the Roman state. The water shimmered, a vast, placid mirror under the relentless Roman sun. For a moment, an unnatural calm held. Then, the world erupted. The deep thunder of drums rolled across the stands, and the piercing blast of war horns sliced through the air. From opposite ends of the man-made lake, 2 full fleets of warships surged forward, their oars churning the water into a frenzy. On their decks, soldiers in full armor stood ready with spears and catapults. But this was no distant sea. The thousands of screaming spectators were not watching from coastal cliffs, but from the stone tiers of a colossal, purpose-built basin. This was not war. It was a naumachia, Rome's most audacious and deadly form of entertainment. These were mock naval battles, fought with real ships, real weapons, and men who were truly dying. The mastermind of this incredible spectacle was Julius Caesar. In 46 BC, to celebrate his quadruple triumph, he ordered the excavation of an enormous basin near the Tiber River. There, he staged a reenactment of a battle between the fleets of Tyre and Egypt. The combatants were thousands of condemned prisoners and prisoners of war. They fought as soldiers, but with no hope of victory, no chance of survival. Their death was the point of the show. The scale of these productions grew with the egos of the emperors. Augustus, Caesar's heir, outdid his predecessor by constructing a gargantuan basin in 2 BC. It measured 800 by 200 Roman feet, so vast that a new aqueduct, the Aqua Alsiatina, had to be built solely to fill it. On these artificial waters, 30 warships and thousands of men clashed in a choreographed dance of death. A clear message. Rome's power was so absolute, it could command not just armies, but the very elements. Sometimes, the spectacle moved beyond the city. In AD 52, Emperor Claudius staged a naumachia on the Fucine Lake before draining it as a massive public works project. As the fleets prepared for battle, the combatants were said to have raised their arms in a collective salute to the imperial box, delivering the immortal, chilling words, Avenue, Imperator, morituri te salutant. Hail, Emperor, those who are about to die salute you. Whether scripted or a spontaneous cry of the damned, the phrase captured the raw fatalism of men whose lives were being spent like currency for public amusement. By the time the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum, opened its gates, naumachia were synonymous with imperial grandeur. Under Domitian, it's believed the arena floor itself could be flooded, turning the heart of Rome into a miniature sea of carnage. Even a century after Caesar, the tradition held strong. Emperor Trajan, celebrating his conquest of Dacia, constructed the Naumachia Vaticana in AD 109, a massive flooded stadium near the Vatican Hill. There, before the roaring masses, more fleets clashed, and more lives were extinguished in the name of spectacle. Each naumachia was a microcosm of the empire itself, a demonstration of total control over water, over life and death, over history. In these floating arenas, Rome didn't just reenact conquest, it ritualized domination. During the midday lull, as the stench of blood and sweat hung heavy in the Colosseum, a different kind of performance began. By the time of the grand opening in AD 80, executions were no longer simple punitive acts. They had become high theater. The emperors, starting with Titus, used this interval to stage ludi meridiani, midday games where mythological tortures were brought to horrifying life. These were not symbolic reenactments with actors and clever stagecraft. They were real deaths, meticulously designed to mirror the fates of legendary figures from Greek and Roman lore. The poet Martial, an eyewitness to the inaugural games, chronicled the horrors in his epigrams. He described a man, costumed as the legendary musician Orpheus, entering the arena with his lyre. For a moment, the myth lived, but where the fabled Orpheus charmed wild beasts with his music, this man's song was brutally cut short. The beasts, deaf to his art, were real. A bear, released from a hidden gate, rose up and mauled him, his lyre falling silent in the blood-soaked sand. The crowd, Martial noted, witnessed a legend made real, but it was the beast, not the artist, that triumphed. The message was clear. In Rome's world, brutal reality always devoured myth. Perhaps the most disturbing of these performances was the reenactment of the myth of Pasiphae, the Cretan queen cursed by the gods to lust after a bull. In the arena, a condemned woman was forced into a wooden contraption, or sometimes simply tied down, and subjected to the advances of a real bull. The spectacle deliberately shattered the boundaries between myth, punishment, and a dark, prurient voyeurism. It was depravity disguised as high culture. Fire, too, was a favored tool of the imperial stage managers. The tunica molesta, a tunic soaked in pitch, oil, and resin, was fastened to a victim. Sometimes, this was framed as the death of the hero Mucius Scaevola, who defiantly burned his own hand. More often, it was simply raw torture, the victim set ablaze to run, screaming through the arena like a human torch, their agony, a brief, fiery spectacle for the jeering crowd. The Christian apologist Tertullian, writing from within a persecuted community, described these executions with bitter fury. He spoke of victims being tied to posts and mocked as kindling men, their torment presented as a perverse play. He saw a man dressed as the god Attis being castrated, another as Hercules being burned alive on a pyre. This was not justice. It was control, wrapped in the sacred cloak of ritual and myth. By making death an echo of divine or legendary punishment, the emperors gave the audience not a lesson in morality, but a perverse and thrilling form of catharsis. As legends were resurrected in fire and blood, the line between theater and execution, between story and atrocity, utterly collapsed. In the Roman arena, myth was not meant to be read or remembered. It was meant to be relived, in the flesh. From a somber funeral rite in a muddy cattle market to vast, water-filled arenas of choreographed warfare, Rome perfected the alchemy of turning death into power. Blood on the sand, on the water, and in the flame was not just violence. It was policy. It was a spectacle of statecraft that forged a culture, binding a sprawling empire together through a shared language of choreographed death. The echoes of that language still haunt us. They linger in our modern stadiums, in our thirst for spectacle, and in every debate we have about the line between entertainment and exploitation. As the philosopher Seneca wrote after a day at the games, his words a chilling indictment that resonates across 2 millennia. I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more self-indulgent, yes, even more cruel and inhuman, because I have been among human beings,